Get that crane in here now. We are done. This piece of junk isn't moving." The shout echoed off the corrugated steel walls of the maintenance bay, sharp with frustration and defeat. Sergeant Miller threw his heavy wrench onto the concrete floor with a deafening clang, wiping a smear of grease and black grit from his forehead. Behind him, the massive 60-ton beast, an M1 Abrams main battle tank, sat silent and immobile, its left track thrown completely off the sprocket, lying like a dead snake in the dust. The young mechanics stood around it, hands on their hips, defeated by the sheer physics of the machine. In the corner of the bay, pushing a wide push broom with a rhythmic scraping sound, was Bill. He paused for a moment, leaning on the broom handle, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the thrown track. He wasn't wearing a uniform anymore, just a faded gray jumpsuit issued to the civilian groundskeepers. He was 79 years old, with a slight limp in his right leg and hands that looked like gnarled oak roots. "You don't need a crane," Bill said, his voice gravelly and low, barely carrying over the hum of the ventilation fans. Sergeant Miller spun around, his patience already evaporated by the 90-degree heat and the 3 hours of wasted labor. "Excuse me," Miller snapped, his eyes flashing with the arrogance of a man who trusts manuals over intuition. "I said you don't need a crane," Bill repeated, stepping forward slightly, though he didn't let go of his broom. "You're fighting the tension. You need to release the idler arm and use a pivot point. A crane takes 4 hours. You can fix this in 5 minutes with a crowbar if you know where to push." The mechanics exchanged glances, a few of them snickering. Miller shook his head, a mocking smile curling his lip. "Okay, Grandpa, stick to the sweeping. We've got digital diagnostics and hydraulic tensioners. We don't fix 60-ton war machines with crowbars and guessing games anymore. This is the 21st century." He turned his back on Bill. "Call the heavy lift team. Tell them we're dead in the water." Bill watched them for a second, his face unreadable, then turned back to his sweeping. He knew something they didn't. He knew the tank wasn't just a machine. It was a living thing, and right now it was laughing at them. If you believe that experience deserves respect, type honor in the comments right now. Because what happened next didn't just fix a tank. It shattered an entire world view. The heat in the motor pool was oppressive, a physical weight that pressed down on the shoulders of every man and woman in the unit. It was the kind of heat that made temperamental machinery fail and temperamental men snap. The M1 Abrams was supposed to be the pride of the battalion, a pinnacle of American engineering, but right now it was a 60-ton paperweight. The inspection was looming. General Sterling, a man known for eating commanders for breakfast and spitting out their careers before. Lunch was due to arrive at 1400 hours. It was currently 11:30. The timeline was collapsing, and the tension in the bay was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sergeant Miller was technically proficient. He had aced every written test at Aberdeen Proving Ground. He knew the torque specs, the fluid dynamics, and the electronic control units better than anyone in the platoon. But he lacked the one thing that couldn't be taught in a classroom: the touch. The touch is what tells a mechanic that a bolt is about to strip before it actually does. It's the sense that feels the vibration of a failing bearing through the soles of your boots. Bill had the touch. He had acquired it over 50 years ago in jungles where the mud sucked the boots off your feet, and later in deserts where the sand scoured the paint off the armor. Bill had been a master gunner, a platoon sergeant, and eventually a tank commander. He had lived inside the steel belly of Patton tanks, M60s, and the very first generations of the Abrams. But to the young crew in the bay, he was just the old guy who emptied the trash cans and swept up the metal shavings. They saw the gray hair, the limp, the thick glasses, and the hearing aid. They didn't see the silver star hidden in a drawer at home. They didn't see the man who had kept a tank running for 3 days on a cracked transmission and sheer willpower during the Gulf War. They just saw a janitor. "Sir, heavy lift says they are backed up," a corporal reported, his voice trembling slightly as he addressed Sergeant Miller. They can't get a crane here until 1600. Miller's face went pale. 1600. The general is here in 2 hours. If this tank isn't on the line, the captain is going to have my stripes. He kicked the thrown track in frustration, hurting his toe more than the steel. Try the hydraulics again. Max pressure. The crew scrambled, hooking up the lines, sweating profusely. The hydraulic pump whined, a high-pitched scream of mechanical exertion. The track groaned, lifting slightly, but the teeth of the sprocket wouldn't align with the end connectors. It was jammed. The geometry was off. Push it! Push it! Miller screamed. It's going to snap! Another mechanic yelled, backing away. A hydraulic line hissed dangerously, bulging under the pressure. Cut it! Cut it! Miller shouted, waving his arms. The pump died down. The track slammed back into the dirt, exactly where it had been an hour ago. Silence fell over the bay, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the heavy breathing of the defeated crew. Bill was still there. He hadn't left. He was leaning against a workbench now, watching the fiasco with a look of pained sympathy. He wasn't gloating. A tanker hates to see a tank down, regardless of who is in charge. He walked over slowly, the sound of his boots heavy on the concrete. He didn't ask for permission this time. He walked past Miller, past the corporals, past the high-tech diagnostic tablets that were blinking, red error codes. He walked straight to the tool rack on the far wall. His gnarled hands bypassed the pneumatic wrenches and the laser alignment tools. He reached for a solid iron crowbar, a 6-foot length of hardened steel, chipped and worn, with a hooked end. It was a tool that looked like it belonged in a blacksmith shop from the 1800s, not a modern military hangar. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Miller barked, stepping in Bill's path. "I told you to stay out of the way. This is a hazardous area, and you are not authorized to touch the equipment." Bill stopped. He looked Miller in the eye. Bill's eyes were a faded blue, watery with age, but beneath the surface, there was steel harder than the tank's armor. "You're authorized to fail," Bill said quietly. "I'm authorized to fix it. You have 2 hours until the general gets here. You have no crane. You have no options. You can let me reset this track, or you can explain to General Sterling why his lead tank is sitting in the dirt." The sheer audacity of the old janitor stunned Miller. He opened his mouth to yell, to order Bill out of the building, to call security. But he looked at the tank. He looked at the clock. Desperation is a powerful motivator. "You have 5 minutes, Miller hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "If you scratch that sprocket, if you hurt anyone, or if you waste my time, I'm having you fired. I'll make sure you never work on a government contract again." Bill didn't answer. He didn't need to. He walked to the rear of the tank. He knelt in the dirt, ignoring the pain in his bad knee. He looked at the track, not at the computer screen, but at the track itself. He ran his hand along the rubber pads and the steel connectors. He found the bind. The track was twisted slightly at the third link, creating a tension point that the hydraulics were fighting against. The computer couldn't see the twist. The manual didn't account for the specific way the tank was sitting on a slight incline in the concrete. Bill stood up. "Driver!" he barked. The voice that came out of him wasn't the voice of a janitor. It was the command voice of a non-commissioned officer, a voice trained to be heard over the roar of a turbine engine and the boom of a 120mm cannon. The young private in the driver's seat jumped, startled. He looked at Miller. Miller nodded reluctantly. "Do what he says." "Driver, listen to me," Bill commanded, positioning himself at the rear idler wheel. "I need you to neutral steer, left side only, on my mark. Not a full rotation. Just a bump. You hear me? Just a bump." The driver nodded, his hands sweating on the controls. Bill took the crowbar. He didn't jam it in randomly. He found a specific gap between the end connector and the sprocket teeth. He wedged the tip of the bar in, finding a fulcrum point on the hull itself. He leaned back, testing the grip. It held. This was physics in its purest form. Archimedes once said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." Bill didn't need to move the world. He just needed to move 3 tons of steel 2 inches to the left. "Ready!" Bill shouted. He gripped the bar with both hands, his muscles straining against the fabric of his coveralls. Veins popped out on his forearms. For a second, he looked 20 years younger. The frailty was gone, replaced by raw, functional power. Now, the driver engaged the transmission. The turbine whined. The sprocket began to turn. At the exact split second the tension built, Bill threw his entire body weight onto the end of the crowbar. He wasn't fighting the tank. He was guiding it. He was the conductor, and the tank was the orchestra. The sound was like a gunshot. The mechanics flinched. Miller took a step forward, expecting to see broken metal, expecting to see the crowbar snapped in half or the sprocket teeth sheared off. The track snapped upward. Guided by the leverage of the bar, the teeth caught the connectors. The bind released instantly. The track seated itself into the groove of the road wheels with a heavy, satisfying thud of finality. "Stop!" Bill signaled. The driver killed the power. The sudden silence was louder than the noise had been. The track was perfect. It was tight, aligned, and ready to roll. Bill slowly released the pressure on the bar. He pulled it free and wiped the grease off the tip with a rag from his pocket. He stood up, exhaling a long breath, and patted the fender of the tank affectionately. "She's good to go," Bill said softly, almost to himself. He turned to look at Miller. The sergeant's jaw was practically on the floor. The other mechanics were staring at Bill as if he had just performed a magic trick. They looked from the high-tech hydraulic pumps that had failed to the simple iron bar in Bill's hand. "How?" Miller stammered. "How did you do that?" "The tension rating. The manual says—" "The manual," Bill interrupted gently, "was written by engineers who sit in air-conditioned offices. The tank was built to be fixed in the mud, under fire, by tired men who just want to go home. You are trying to force it. You have to work with it." He started to walk back to his broom. The moment of glory was over. He was just the janitor again. But before he could reach his corner, the bay doors rolled open with a mechanical hum. A Humvee pulled up, followed by a staff car, the inspection party. General Sterling stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, with 3 stars on his collar and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He marched into the bay, flanked by a colonel and a sergeant major. Miller snapped to attention, his face flushing red. He was terrified. The tank was fixed, but the bay was a mess of hydraulic fluid and tools. "At ease," Sterling rumbled. He walked straight to the tank. He looked at the track. He looked at the tension. He nodded. "Good tension, ready for the field exercises. I heard you boys were having trouble with the track mechanism on this unit." "Yes, sir," Miller said, his voice shaky. We had a technical issue, but we resolved it." "Resolved it quickly, it seems," Sterling noted. "Who is your lead mechanic?" Miller hesitated. This was the moment. He could take the credit. He could say he fixed it. It would save his reputation. It would guarantee his promotion. He looked at the tank. Then he looked at Bill, who was back in the corner, sweeping a pile of dust. Miller swallowed hard. He looked back at the general. "Sir, I couldn't fix it. The equipment failed. It was the facility caretaker who fixed it." Sterling frowned, his eyebrows knitting together. "The caretaker? The janitor?" "Yes, sir." Sterling turned. He looked into the dim corner of the bay. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide. The granite face cracked, a look of genuine shock, followed by a sudden, beaming warmth spread across his features. "Bill?" the general called out, his voice booming. "Bill Williams." Bill stopped sweeping. He turned around, squinting through his thick glasses. "Hello, Mike," he said simply. The entire bay froze. The general, Iron Mike Sterling, just got called Mike by the janitor. The general didn't get angry. He walked across the bay, ignoring the oil slicks, ignoring the protocol. He walked right up to Bill and extended his hand. Bill took it. Then, the general pulled him into a bear hug. "I haven't seen you since Fort Hood, Top," the general said, stepping back and looking Bill up and down. "What in God's name are you doing pushing a broom?" "Keeping busy," Bill shrugged. "Keeps the joints moving." General Sterling turned to the stunned group of mechanics. "Do you know who this man is?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Silence. "This is Master Sergeant William Williams. He was my tank commander in Desert Storm. At the Battle of 73 Easting, our platoon was cut off. We had 3 tanks down, dust everywhere, Republican Guard closing in. This man," he pointed a gloved finger at Bill, "single-handedly kept those tanks fighting. He fixed a breached fuel line with an MRE wrapper and duct tape while under mortar fire. He's the reason I'm standing here today. He's the reason half of this battalion has a history to read about." Sterling looked at the M1 Abrams. "And let me guess, he fixed the track with a crowbar." Miller nodded, mute with shock. "The Williams wedge." Sterling chuckled, shaking his head. "He taught me that move in 1991. We tried to get it in the manual, but the brass said it wasn't standardized procedure. Too dangerous for untrained personnel." The general looked at Miller. "You boys have a national treasure sweeping your floors, and you probably treated him like furniture." Miller looked at Bill. The shame was evident on his face. He saw the gray coveralls differently now. He didn't see a janitor. He saw a master sergeant. A legend. I didn't know," Miller whispered. "You didn't ask," Bill said softly. "You saw the broom. You stopped looking." The general patted Bill on the shoulder. "Bill, I'm taking you to lunch, my treat, and we are going to talk about getting you out of these coveralls and into a consulting role. I have 1,000 mechanics who know how to read a computer but don't know how to listen to a tank. I need you to teach them the touch." "I don't know, Mike." Bill smiled, leaning on his broom. "I kind of like the quiet." "That's an order, Master Sergeant." Sterling smiled. Bill straightened up. Instinct took over. He snapped a salute that was crisper and sharper than anything the young soldiers in the room had ever produced. "Yes, sir." As the general and Bill walked out of the bay toward the staff car, the general listening intently as Bill explained the issue with the idler arm design, the workshop was silent. Sergeant Miller looked down at the crowbar Bill had left on the workbench. It was just a piece of iron, rusty, heavy, simple. But in the right hands, it was a precision instrument. Miller picked it up. It felt heavy. He realized he had been relying so much on the technology that was supposed to make his life easier. He had forgotten the fundamentals that made the job possible. He walked over to the spot where Bill had been sweeping. There was still a small pile of dust. Miller grabbed the broom. He started sweeping. "Sarge," one of the corporals asked, "what are you doing?" "Learning," Miller said. "Get back to work. Recheck the torque on those end connectors, manually, hand tools only. But the computer says—" "I don't care what the computer says," Miller snapped, but there was no malice in it this time, only focus. "I want to feel the tension. If Bill says the computer misses the twist, then the computer misses the twist. We do it the hard way, the right way." The narrative of Bill isn't just a story about a tank track. It's a mirror held up to a society that is increasingly obsessed with the new, the digital, and the shiny, while discarding the old, the analog, and the experienced. We live in a world that assumes that if something isn't on a screen, it's not real. We assume that because someone is old, they are obsolete. Because someone holds a broom, they have nothing to teach us. But true mastery doesn't expire. Wisdom doesn't depreciate. The tactics of warfare change, the technology evolves, but the physics of steel and the grit of the human spirit remain exactly the same. Bill was a gray man. In military terms, someone who blends in, who doesn't draw attention, who moves silently through the noise. But the gray men are often the ones holding the world together. They are the ones who know where the fulcrum is. They are the ones who know that sometimes You have to stop looking at the manual and start looking at the reality in front of you. That day in the motor pool changed the culture of the entire maintenance battalion. General Sterling made good on his promise. Bill was hired as a senior technical advisor. He didn't wear a uniform, and he didn't wear a suit. He wore his work boots and jeans. He held clinics on Saturdays. He didn't use PowerPoint. He took the mechanics out to the tanks, handed them crowbars, and taught them how to feel the machine breathe. He taught them that technology is a tool, not a crutch. He taught them that respect isn't owed to rank. It's owed to competence. And he taught them that everyone, from the general to the janitor, has a role to play in the mission. Sergeant Miller eventually became a warrant officer. Years later, when asked about the turning point in his career, he wouldn't talk about a battle or a medal. He would talk about a hot afternoon in a dusty bay and an old man with a crowbar who taught him that humility is the first step to mastery. He kept that old crowbar. He had it mounted on the wall of his office. Beneath it, he placed a small plaque. It didn't have a date or a unit name. It just had 3 words: the Williams wedge. A reminder that the simplest solution is often the best, provided you have the wisdom to see it and the strength to execute it. As you go about your week, look around you. Look at the people you usually overlook, the quiet ones, the older ones, the ones doing the jobs you think are beneath you. Ask yourself, what do they know that I don't? What wars have they fought? What tracks have they fixed while I was still learning to walk? You might be surprised by the answers. You might find a hero disguised as a janitor. There is a Bill in every workplace, in every neighborhood, maybe even in your own family. Someone whose stories have gone unheard because no one bothered to ask. Someone whose value has been misjudged by the cover of their book. It is our duty, not just as veterans or patriots, but as human beings, to recognize that value, to honor the path paved by those who came before us. If this story reminded you that experience is the most valuable tool in the box, and that true heroes often walk among us unnoticed, then I have one final request. Join our community. We tell the stories that history books forget. We honor the men and women who built the foundation we stand on. Click that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let's make sure that the next time someone sees a Bill sweeping the floor, they don't just see a janitor. They see a teacher. Until next time, stay sharp, keep your powder dry, and respect the old guard. They know the tricks you haven't even thought of yet.